What you're about to hear is a lecture that I gave on October 11th, 2025 for my seminar. It's an ongoing seminar called the David McKerracher Seminar, DMS. I don't usually make all of it public. I mean, most of it's not public, but this is one that I thought might be beneficial. You might find it relieving. You might think that it gives you some kind of a sense for what you're doing here. Might help you figure something out in the world of philosophy and theory. And I do that in part by contrasting it to other kinds of hobbies and talking about the different kinds of social reactions and ramifications that we encounter when doing this in the underground or for non-strictly career-based reasons. So yeah, if you find that interesting, I think that you will enjoy this. But with that said, keep in mind, I was addressing people familiar with my work. If some of this goes over your head, I'm sorry about that. Don't worry. Nothing essential is going to go over your head. You'll get the essential bits, even if some of it is like, what? What are you talking about? Asynchronous simultaneity? What's that about? Don't worry about techno mumbo jumbo. Is that what it? Whatever. Don't worry about the jargon. All right. And anyway, hope you enjoy. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you haven't ever been here before, I know that's just a thing that we say, like, oh, like, comment, subscribe, but it actually makes a difference. It's kind of like if you're walking through the store and let's use the example of like checking out with the cashier. Like, do you do the pleasantries? Do you like smile and nod or acknowledge them at all? Maybe not. Maybe you got a lot on your mind and you're too busy, right? Maybe when you're listening to this, you've got the phone in your pocket and it doesn't make sense to like pull it out, click the button, make it say that you like it or whatever. But I mean, really, if you don't do that, I don't show up for other people and we wither away. And though I do a lot to avoid growing fast, I do still like to be growing. And so thanks for helping me do that. The courtesy, it means something. It's a way of paying it forward if you find this worthwhile. It's also a way of training the algorithm. So train it to show you more of this. And I think that'll be good. All right, geez. All right, let's get to it. All right, everybody. Welcome to the October 11th McKerracher seminar. It's so good to have all of you here. Quite a good turnout compared to a couple of the last months here. I was thinking, and I think I might have said this a couple of times already, but probably most of you haven't heard it, and so it bears repeating, that my asynchronous simultaneity idea couldn't have come at a worse time in the sort of development of TU. But at the same time, I think it was good. Not just in terms of the lessons learned, but also because I think it allowed a lot of us to get our summers and enjoy them. And so what I mean by the worst time for that idea is to say it's not a bad idea. It was just a bad time to put it into action. And the reason for that was because TU was going through some pretty big changes. And it was a kind of time where maybe circling the troops, circling the wagons, people have different kinds of terms for this, but basically rallying together, building resolve, that could have been good. But instead I was basically like, for those who didn't actually see that lecture in the Fundamental Problems and Core Concepts course, the idea was like, you know what? There's been too much of this feeling like you have to be there for the live event, but it's not really being there, right? You're not really there anyway, in a sort of sense, right? Because you're kind of performing in front of a Zoom call. And some people have reported feeling self-conscious, like they're really more interested in like, where are my eyes looking? And does it look like I'm shifty? And, basically, this sort of second order observation question factors in a way that is different than if you were in a live classroom or sitting around a seminar table. And I think that's very obvious for anybody who has been in a real meeting or a real lecture or a real seminar, like a real one. I'm not talking about where everybody's kind of going through the motions, performing being there, which is also very common, at the university today. People are kind of, they're there to show, look, professor, I did enough of the reading to be able to say something. And that's my contribution. And that's not a real meeting. But for anybody who has been in a real meeting, you do know the difference. And, I don't like lying to ourselves. And I think that if philosophy is not making us more honest with ourselves and one another, then what are we really doing, right? And so, of course, that then leads into this approach where, we're really critical of what are we actually achieving on here. And I said recently to Sean Middlestat on Substack that awareness that this is a simulation and that awareness that it's all really like some kind of a weird business and all of that kind of stuff, because we come from the kind of theory that we do, makes it so that we can't really play the believing game and get seduced by it and just give ourselves over to it, and therefore that would be good for it, right? For the entire experience. Like, because this is the Lacanian point when he says that the non-dupe errs, which is to say that the person who's like, oh, I'm not duped, right? That person is erring because we're all duped. And that actually being duped by a fantasy scenario is actually the condition of possibility for actually doing things in reality. The non-duped errs, right? And we're all like, oh, well, we're very critical. We understand that this is fake to a certain extent. Yeah, well, it's also real to a certain extent. And so it's, a matter of bending the bow. But insofar as it's real, it's able to give us a sense of, I'm really not alone. I am actually in a world with other people who genuinely care about this stuff, right? Morale and resolve. I put those on the whiteboard because I've been thinking about that a lot. Resolve. Morale. I felt demoralized for a while. A lot of us have had the experience of feeling demoralized, like when you have a boss treat you poorly, or a manager treat you poorly, or a family member, right? There's a sort of lack of respect. That could be demoralizing. But there's a lot of other things that can be demoralizing too, that have nothing to do with the things that people are saying or doing to you. I remember at some point, really early on, feeling demoralized because people would call me cute when I was a little kid. I don't think that's a normal experience. I think a lot of little kids, they get called cute and they just act cuter and they just love it. But like, I would get angry and like, it just kind of like, leave me alone. What are you talking? You're infantilizing me. Yes, Dave. Well, you're an infant. Of course we're infantilizing you. You're a literal baby and you're precious. And I'm just like, no. Is that actually demoralizing? I'm not for most people, but maybe it was for me. Maybe I was just a weird kid, and I think that's probably just the case, right? But there's other times that people might treat you like you're cute when you're in a serious setting and you're an adult. And it's like, well, that's patronizing, that's demoralizing, right? I put this on the table here at the beginning of this, not just to say that, it was important to build resolve during that period, and instead we were doing a lot of not live events, but also because I do want to open up this broader theme of moralization. not moralizing, but moralization. If demoralization is a thing, then moralization must be a thing. What is moralization? Is it flattery? Is it saying, oh, you're really good at that, Wukas? I really like your piece that's going to be in this new volume. It's really good, right? Yeah, maybe if you want a little sticker when you're a child, but there's something more in the moralization that we want. There's something more that we want, and it's not just proxy recognition or the simulation of recognition, and it's not prestige. It's not, oh yes, I've got some kind of a degree for this. I think that there could always be something like that. We do want to see ourselves getting better, and some kind of recognition might be important for that. But going back to Waypoint and Timenergy, and every time I've ever used the word recognition, I realized I was using that word in an idiosyncratic way that has created some confusion, because when Benjamin talks about recognition and time, for instance, it's like, well, that's prestige. That's honor. And that's a lot less what I'm talking about. This is, of course, what Bourdieu is talking about when he's talking about symbolic capital, right? Which is to say that the cultural and social capital that can be gained when navigating a field where there is symbolic capital to be won or lost, that it functions kind of like capital, like economic capital, right? Except that with symbolic capital, it's the opposite. It only works when you believe, or when people are kind of playing this game where they believe that there's no personal self-interest to be won or lost, right? Symbolic capital works best when it's not obvious that there's a profit motive. Symbolic capital works best when it's not obvious that you have a personal gain coming to you through that activity. And so this is a big deal in professional spaces, right? This is why we talk about the calling. I feel called to do this. And it's genuinely true, right? I do feel called to do what I do. That's a strange thing. We can do a whole phenomenology of the calling itself and then try to get at what's going on at a deeper level. We can try to do that as psychoanalysts. We can try to do that as Bourdieu would, as socioanalysts. But the basic point is, and what I'm trying to get at by talking about recognition, and what I mean in my own idiosyncratic way of bringing it up here, is that I think we are trying to get something more than recognition, time, or symbolic capital. The symbolic capital is literally the institution. And look, pragmatically, we might enter or exit and then re-enter institutions throughout our lives. That says very little about what's ultimately driving us. Or it doesn't necessarily say the whole story about what's driving us. But what I have not done is lay out a thoroughgoing theory of the there that is there on the other side of the simulacrum of recognition, or time, or symbolic capital. Meaning that, well, maybe it's more than just a sort of survival in the political economic situation that drives you. Maybe there's a real there. There's something real that you're responding to. There could be a real call that you are responding to, but it gets captured by the institution. It gets captured by the political economic situation and its contingencies and its necessities. There are necessary constraints on the situation, and you get caught up with the incentive structures of these institutions because these institutions do a really good job conflating the mission that they're giving you with the mission that you have in your heart. I'm proposing there actually might be a difference between these things, whereas I think the more Baudrillardian approach would be to just say, no, there's no there. There's not a baby in that bathwater. It's just signs. It's just sign value, or to use his mentor, Bourdieu's words, it's all just some reaction to, gravitation towards, or repulsion from the symbolic capital that constitutes the tendencies, the flows, and rates of exchange within and between fields. Now that's a much more theoretical preamble than I wanted to do here. And it opens up a whole bucket of worms that I'm not going to try to scoop back up and put back in the bucket. I'm going to just let it go and say that if you want to go deeper into socioanalysis, I did talk quite a lot about it in my intro to social theory, critical social theory lectures from last fall and this spring. And if you don't know where to find that, then just ask on the public forum of the Discord, which is currently where everything supposedly happens. I mean, really, it's like none of us really like Discord. We're all there because we have to be, in a sort of sense. And there's hopefully going to be a new platform very soon. The app is in development. I'm very excited about it. But now I'm going to put this symbolic capital prestige question aside, and this question of like, is there really a there? Is there really like a calling? And say, look, I am not going to do some kind of a thoroughgoing ontology, and from that basis of that, defend that there is something real about that calling beyond the libidinal complexes that you developed going through the mirror stage. And then the socialization process through the schooling system after that. I'd like to just play the believing game for a little while and just say, I think that there is. I think that there is. And I think it is worth assuming that there is. And so this idea that there's a there's actually something driving your activity, raises this bigger question about what is it that you are doing? Now, this question comes in all sorts of ways. One of them, a common one, it's a refrain of sorts, is not what am I doing, where a person asks that of his or herself. It's instead, so what are we doing? Or it might be, so what are you doing? And I've found that people who really don't know what they're doing really like this question. So instead of saying, I have no idea what I'm doing, guys, I feel totally lost, they say, what are you doing? Or they say, what are we doing? And I want to be like, who's we here? Why are you? I'm suddenly like your accomplice in being lost. What are you doing? You say, what are we doing? Well, the real question is, what are you doing? I know what I'm doing. I've been talking about what I'm doing. I've been telling everybody about what I've been doing. I have a ton of content about what I'm doing. I'm not keeping it a secret up until now, up until pretty recently. I've not been keeping any of it a secret. I've been more transparent than anyone I know. What are you talking about? I don't believe in the distinction between exoteric and esoteric, right? I do believe in like secrets between friends or something like that, but not really, especially not when I'm doing theory or philosophy. For me, it's like that is a conversation with the world and the future, right? Like theory is a conversation I'm having with people who are not present. And if there are fellow travelers who are also engaged in that process and we can like synergize or make each other better, then great. But theory is a conversation being had with people who are not present, right? Marx did not write Das Kapital for people who were in the room with him. And Nietzsche did not write the genealogy of morals for people who were alive during his time. He says in the actual introduction, he's writing it for a new kind of man, a new kind of philosopher, one that has not yet been born. It was on that basis and sort of in that sort of vein that I gave myself some time because I felt like this weird pressure to write in a certain way for people. I had to write in a certain way to please people. And I realized I don't have to. I can give myself time to not know. It's actually kind of, and this is why I said what Alex was saying before I started the recording is a good springboard. It's like his talk from the retreat, which, by the way, folks, if you want to listen to that, it is available. It's in the McKerracher seminar playlist. All of the talks from up on the hill on the last night of the retreat. Those talks are available in one video there. I've published publicly 3 of them so far. I don't think I'm going to be publishing any of the other ones. I just published the first and second place winners. I think the other ones are really good, but also not everything has to be published on the front side of the channel. That doesn't make what happened up there any less canonical for those of us in the org. The point is just like what goes up on the channel. I do have to think to some extent like, okay, well, you know, what's the balance of different types of content that I'm putting out? I have to, there's a lot of stuff that I haven't done recently that I do want to start doing again, like podcasts, but I also have video essays. And so anyway, I can't just publish that stuff, but it's canonical anyway. What Alex shared there. It's actually impressive. He gave the first talk where my studio is being built. The first proto-agora in North Idaho. The first time that people in my life, the local community, old friends, family, that came together to hear, what are you guys doing? What are you guys on about? The very first talk came from Alex. And he gave his, I'm trying to figure it out. I have convictions. I'm trying to be humble about those convictions. And I'm trying to navigate things. It's like a walk, you know? And so he gave this meandering talk. And we were talking about how that was poetic genius in a sort of sense, right? Because the meandering was the whole theme in the first place. And so it's about coming into a sort of being okayness with the question, right? It's a living in the question. Has anybody seen the post I put out called A Letter to a Young Intellectual? What's the hurry? Right? That's on the Substack. It'll also be in my forthcoming book. And the point of that is not just me pretending I'm an old wise sage sitting up on a hill somewhere being like, oh, listen, you youngsters, you young whippersnapper. No, the point is like for me, it's like a reminder for myself, right? Like this is something that I have to remind myself. And why do I have to remind myself that it's the hurry, the pressure that you feel to say everything and have it all figured out, that pressure is bullshit, right? Why do I feel the need to say that pressure is bullshit? Well, because nobody else says it. Nobody else in the theory scene says it. Instead, there's a lot of posturing and people act like, well, you see, I have a PhD, so I've figured it all out. And if you don't, well, then you actually have to go and you have to check X, Y, and Z boxes, and then you will be. And that's cool if this is your entire horizon of possibilities. I'm tapping on the whiteboard at the word institution. And institutions, love them or hate them, are probably necessary. They're probably necessary. But there also might be a there on the other side of the institution. There might be a truth, a reality, a good, something that you feel called to that's been captured by that institution. So I'll juxtapose that institution to the call. Every profession, if it's a genuine occupation, has a rich history of people thinking about it as a calling. Think about the Hippocratic Oath. Anyone who takes that has a genuine calling. Of course, nowadays, it might just be to provide for your family and have some vacations because you don't want a shitty job and everyone told you that you should be a doctor. Right. So, yeah, maybe. The Hippocratic Oath, what does that even mean when they're in such a hurry to put people on lifelong regimens of medications that come with arguably sometimes equally as bad symptoms, you know? What does do no harm mean now? When harm reduction means actively harming people, doing irreparable damage to people because you're trying not to do harm, right? These are interesting questions at the dawn of the post-human era, right? Because anybody who wants to do good, or as Marx said, the point is to change the world. If you want to change the world, if you feel called to change the world, well then the gateway to doing that change is either through the doorway of the institution, or it's like downstream from the institution on YouTube, on podcasts, with people who either have the school brain from those institutions or are sort of like playing like they did the thing, right? And so you have a lot of people who are school-brained, or you have people who are trying to satisfy an audience that has certain kinds of expectations about what a professional is supposed to be like. What is professional writing? What is professional speaking? These are important questions, and they're not the same questions as like, what is genuine writing and what is genuine speaking? I'm getting a lot, and I understand this, I'm getting a lot with this word genuine. A lot that I'm doing kind of relies on it. And if you're really good at deconstruction, you're already thinking, well, that, if I really want to pull apart this whole talk, I could just focus on that word genuine and then ultimately turn it into nothing's genuine anymore. And we don't really have the criteria for authenticity at our disposal. And everything's been captured by the simulation of the spectacle. Okay. But like I said, we're playing the believing game here. And I think that there is. I just genuinely, at this point, I do believe that there is something genuine. Some kind of genuine thinking, writing, speaking. And not necessarily in that order. I do like how Derrida talks about arche writing, which is to say, it's the writing before the writing. There's a kind of writing in speech. There's a kind of writing in thought, right? We don't just think thoughts in the void like a dematerialized or non-corporeal body. As Levinas gets into during the second half of Totality Infinity, it's a lot more like how Merleau-Ponty describes it. Thinking is rummaging through signs, groping through signs, which is to say, you're lost in language, but you're trying to find your bearings using language. And language has in it a bunch of meanings. And you're trying to work through those and, of course, bring them into relation to your actual life. Levinas always goes a step further than his French contemporaries, especially the ones that followed after him, who never really read him very seriously, by saying that there's an original signifier and there's an original form of signification that's not reducible to those signs and the rummaging through those signs, and is instead the act of feeling called to respond to the other. Before the development of language and its becoming more and more complex, Long before that, there is that feeling called to account for oneself in and by the face of the other. The other is the true signifier, the genuine signifier. You are a genuine signifier. So it's like the word bird, you know, when I say bird, you think of that flapping thing in the sky, or maybe that soaring thing in the sky, or maybe you think of a chicken. But you think of one of those kinds of things when I say bird. But we could also use other languages to describe that thing, you know, other signifiers could step in. And of course, if we're going to be good Saussureans, right? Saussure would say that the word bird doesn't just get its meaning from what it's pointing at, the actual concept of bird. No, it also gets its meaning from what it's not. And so, you know, this is where difference is really useful. It's like the bird is not a dog. The bird is not a tree. That's all baked into language. So you're never just using words for the things themselves. You're using words to point at concepts, and then those concepts are supposed to get a grasp of the things themselves. But that's a whole chain. That's a whole chain. And it's not just that straightforward, because there's also all of the connotations that come from what it's not. Signification in this sense comes through differentiation, a whole background condition of differentiation, which is cool and great. But what Levinas is going to do is say, but hold on, guys, the real signifier, the one that's not replaceable, the one that's not just in contradistinction to other ones, but like the actual genuine other signifier is the concrete human being.
TU is building a studio. I have officially cleared ground. I've been working on it for the last several months on and off, but am, as of this last week, beginning to get a lot more traction on the project because more money has come in. So thank you so much for those who have already contributed via donations for the TU studio. It's going to happen no matter what, but the question is when. If you want to help speed up the process, make things smoother sailing, and help me keep creating the kinds of content that you love, and even better, the kinds of content that is to come. There's a whole new era getting rolled out. If you want to help make it possible and usher it in smoother and faster, the best way to do that is to make a donation via the Zelle link up on the screen here. You see that QR code? Use that QR code. Once you have an account, that QR code should take you to where you can make the bank transfer with zero charge, which is really sweet, huh? Yeah, we love that. That's why we're using Zelle. Thank you so much for helping make this possible.
So I'm talking about genuine thinking, genuine writing, genuine speaking, and I wanted to talk about how this piece that I wrote about giving ourselves time, What's the Hurry, that piece on Substack, it ends with a quote that I think Alex demonstrated in his talk that kicked off the Proto-Agora at McKerracher Family Farm. The quote is by Rilke, the great poet. And in it, he talks about living in the question. I think it's worth pulling up, actually. There's a few quotes that I feel like I'm sort of riding on in this talk. And this is the one that I think is probably the most worth pulling up for you all. But living in the question, to me, in a sort of sense, does mean meandering, wandering, but not doing so with any of their criteria, imperatives, incentives or norms driving you or making up the totality of the coordinates for your background conditions that makes possible your mode of world disclosure, your mode of care. When I said there, who's they, Dave? I was pointing at the whiteboard. I was pointing at the word institution. So, I mean, is that even a they, a proper they? Who's they if they're all replaceable, right? Everybody at an institution is replaceable. That's the definition of an institution. When people come up to a project that is actively being lived out by the founders, and people say, we have to turn this into an institution right now, what they're actually proposing is to make everybody who's essential to it replaceable. When in reality, let's think about the Frankfurt School. The institutionalization of the Frankfurt School never really succeeded. None of them made themselves replaceable. That doesn't make what they did less valuable, right? You could say the same thing for Aristotle's school, the Lyceum. He did not make himself replaceable, right? No great philosopher ever succeeded in making himself replaceable. You know, you could say, well, Jeremy Bentham made himself replaceable in the form of John Stuart Mill. That's about the closest anyone's ever come. But that wasn't an institution. That was an individual. It was like his best friend's child. Okay. And for those of you who don't know the story, Jeremy Bentham was like one of those sort of like white wig wearing kinds of English philosophers who thought that you can basically reduce the good to pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and that at the end of the day, what's good is just what brings pleasure. It's really that simple. Of course, he's a bit more sophisticated than that, but that's utilitarianism in a nutshell, in a very unjust nutshell. And there's a lot of things that it misses, like Death Drive is a huge critique of utilitarianism. But Bentham was a genius. He was also a little weird. I'll just say this one thing so that you know he sticks in your head and you remember him. He had himself mummified, and he left instructions to the institution, the department that he was the chair of or whatever, that they wouldn't have meetings without bringing his mummified remains into the room. They actually wheel out the mummy of Bentham for the meetings that they have. So talk about an attempt at institutionalization. He'll be gone, but we'll bring his mummified remains into the room and he'll watch over us. I don't know if he really has this pose, but that's kind of just what I imagine. You know, he's just like serenely looking over the meeting. So that's Bentham, but John Stuart Mill was born of some of his best friends who were also utilitarians. They had a nice little utilitarian circle going on. And John Stuart Mill's parents had him with the express purpose of bringing up the next greatest utilitarian thinker. And so they put him through the most rigorous and intense schooling anyone's ever seen. And I think that he wrote a book on Greek history at the age of like 10 or something like that. You know, he's like young Nietzsche at the age of 10, very talented and very highly cultured, right? All of this to say, institutions are successful at the point that the humans within them are replaceable. And the only philosopher I can think of who made himself replaceable was kind of Bentham through his intellectual progeny, John Stuart Mill. Okay. Fun little story. But let's read the quote by Rilke. He says, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. I found that especially helpful when I first read it. That's in his letter to a young poet. I read it when I was in my undergrad, and I definitely felt the need to have everything figured out. And I felt this pressure to prove myself. And I found it incredibly relieving to realize, yeah, no, but that would be true. Like actually living a philosophical life, living the examined life, the unexamined life being not worth living, right? As Socrates is said to have said. Living the philosophical life, the examined life, what would that actually entail? You know, is it like you're doing some mad dash scramble to give somebody an answer for everything that they ask you about? No. You know, there's like that bumper sticker, not all who wander are lost. Is that what I'm saying? No, that is not what I'm saying. Though it's true, of course. You can deliberately be wandering. That is actually what Heidegger is getting at in his piece on dwelling. You know, he talks about a way of being in the world, right? That is, you know, yeah, you wander the forest paths, you know. The situationists in a sort of revolutionary France, they were also doing this wandering, right? Guy Debord, he and the situationists would do this sort of, they thought it was radical, this kind of wandering that they would do in the streets. And maybe it was radical. I think that when everywhere you walk and everything you think and every conversation you have has been instrumentalized, giving yourself the mission to not have a mission is pretty radical. And coming to terms with that and being okay with it. But then what do you do when people say, well, what are you doing? Or instead of saying that they don't know what they're doing, they say, what are we doing? What should we do? Well, that's actually kind of related to this question that I wanted to start this thing off. I decided to take a different route. But I started off with this. I said, what are you going to do with that degree? What are you going to do with that expensive hobby? These questions come from other people, right? But these questions get grounded into us. And we start to ask ourselves, well, if it's not for a degree, is it just a hobby? And if it's just a hobby, is it just a really expensive hobby? And if so, like, is that somehow okay? Right? And there's a sort of meme, you know, can't a guy have a hobby? You know, it's a meme in the Warhammer 40K community. I've been looking into this because I've been interested in expensive hobbies. There's an argument to be made that my parents' farm is an expensive hobby. There's an argument to be made that a lot of very meaningful things are just expensive hobbies. And then there's like literal expensive hobbies, like you're going to turn the entire basement of your house into a miniature train setup, you know, and if you've ever seen that, it's pretty freaking awesome. It's very expensive, but what they're doing is they're turning their whole basement into like a little town. There's little tiny trees and there's little tiny people and there's like the trains. It's precious. It's epic. It's both. It's precious and it's epic. I don't mean to be infantilizing or say it's cute, But it is kind of cute the way that like guys, especially, if they just give themselves over to a hobby, they just get so into it. And a lot of the hobbies that we get into play at being something other than a hobby, right? But like the train hobbyist is a train hobbyist, and there's no apologies there. Well, in my looking into hobbies, I've also looked into Warhammer 40K. I had no idea the depth and breadth of this game. I had no idea the lore. I had no idea the $42 miniatures. You get a little miniature like this big, and it just looks like a roided out stormtrooper, you know, and it's $42. And then you buy it and you still have to assemble it and paint it. So it's like painting, assembling. So, okay, the levels to this hobby include buying, assembling, painting, and also learning the rules of the game and the lore. And the rules of the game are complicated and require that you buy for each faction. Any little army that you build is going to require a 62-page, $150 book. Okay. And that's the rules. But there's the lore, and the lore goes beyond what you get in that codex. It actually goes into the hundreds, at least 100 plus books that have been written in this universe. And of course, like Star Wars has hundreds of books and, you know, fan fiction and all of that. But the lore is a lot deeper here. And the steps to being one of the real enjoyers of this hobby, a real hobbyist in the world of 40K, the steps are much, much more expensive in terms of money, but also time and energy. So I've been super interested in that because I feel like if you know someone's dad when you're growing up and he's got a whole bunch, he's got trains with miniature houses in his basement, you like that's like pretty cool. I don't think anyone's like begrudging him that. But as soon as someone's dad is playing with action figures that look like little stormtroopers, it changes. It's like different, right? But the weirdest thing is, if you did just play Warhammer 40K instead of studying philosophy or theory, people aren't going to say, what are you going to do with that? You're going to get left the fuck alone. Like everyone's like, cool. Okay, yeah, you have a hobby. And they might say it's a really expensive hobby. How do you justify how expensive that hobby is? Don't your kids get things too? You know? And you know, that's one of those hobbies where everyone's like, the moment you get into it, everybody says, oh, welcome. You're going to go broke. Oh, welcome. Are you looking forward to the second mortgage? You know, like that's the kind of culture where they're ironically talking about how broke they're going to be because of this. Yet in the world of theory, everybody's like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And so I think that on the one side, it's the question being asked by people who don't know what they're doing and they haven't, like Alex was talking about in his talk, come into being okay with living in the question. So there's that. There's also the fact that people feel this instrumentalized, institutionalized imperative to make sure that it's going to do something by the standards of the actually existing world. And then there's also the more critical theoretical approach, which is the Marxian philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. And that combines with the institutionalized imperatives. And those both combine with not being comfortable about living in the question. And so all three of these things combine, and it just becomes like this giant knot that you are agonizingly living through. And what I'm hoping to achieve through this talk is give you a little relief and distance from it to go, you know what? It's okay to live in the question. Now you go watch the 7-minute version of it. Alex already did it. Thanks, everybody. But I'm not done. I want to talk about the right reasons for being here. What are the right reasons for being here? And what's the right kind of person to even be here in the first place? And what's the right way of going about it? Well, I could make the membership handbook have answers to those questions, but I also think that those answers would be wrong. They would be wrong for you. They might give you some good idea, and they might help you tell your wife why you're doing this. Some people need that, or your parents. You know, some people need, if anybody needs like to be able to convince a loved one who's concerned that they're studying philosophy but not for a degree, do let me know, and I can help you. We could do this during office hours. I almost wrote a book about this. I did write a piece that I never published called, no, I'm not even going to go into that. But I have thought a lot about this problem because I know a lot of guys, especially guys, women, they don't tend to have this problem because when they obsess and get into something, it's usually more socially approved and, or they're just more balanced in their approach. So a lot of women who are at Theory Underground, who do this part-time and listen to these lectures while commuting, for instance, have told me like, yeah, they don't have issues with their loved ones because like they're doing it very part-time, you know? It's just like a thing that they find some kind of inspiration from, and so they keep doing it. Scratches some kind of an itch and nobody begrudges them that. But guys have no chill when it comes to anything that could be called a calling or a hobby. Those are two separate things, right? It would be funny for someone to say that they are called to do Warhammer 40K or build miniature train sets. But when it comes to philosophy, if it is arguably also a hobby, it's nonetheless true that it helps us get situated, not just in our own lives, but also in the world. And I don't just mean the world today, but also in our historical world. And being situated in our life today and historical world, it does give us some kind of a new, hopefully freer orientation towards the future, which does hopefully help you come into a freer relation with yourself, with your devices, with your relationships, with the institutionalized imperatives that we are programmed through, with, and by.
Oh, hey, Dave. What are you up to?
Hello. I'm grading right now. So.
Grading? Well, what's that?
Oh, this? This is a G2 pen. It might be the best pen in the entire world because the price point is perfect for working class people like us. More importantly, cartridges are replaceable. The ink, it glides, but it doesn't smudge too bad. And most importantly, you can do that. And it's really fun.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
We at Theory Underground are not sponsored by Pilot, nor does Pilot endorse this commercial. Theory Underground is funded by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
I said I was going to talk about Charlie Kirk in the Discord, and that was actually going to be my jumping off point, but I feel happier to bring it in now for this reason. When people say, what are you going to do with that? They're not just projecting the fact that they don't know what to do. They're not just Marxists who think that you need to change the world. And they're not just institutionalized, school-brained, thinking like, how's this going to help you in a career? There's something else there. And it's part of the new world that we live in. And that is to say, it is now dangerous to think, write, or speak genuinely. Now, I'm not saying Charlie Kirk was doing that. I don't think he was genuinely thinking, writing, reading. I don't know. No. In fact, if you haven't read Alex's little piece that he posted in the post that he commented it in the post I made called Charlie Kirk is Dead in the public forum on the Discord. In it, he describes Charlie Kirk's behavior and sort of like, what is the spectacle, right? Like he's very much just like describing. It's descriptive. It's a sort of like, what do we see here? Like, let's just watch some Charlie Kirk videos. What do we see here? He describes how clickbaity the thumbnails are. He describes how everything's kind of framed as handing out L's to the left. You know, oh, you said something stupid, you lose. Oh, you said something that I can take out of context. Let me cut you off and frame it in the least charitable way. You lose. Pow, 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 pow. You lose, you lose. Very internet, very Zoomer. No wonder 10 million Zoomers really liked Charlie Kirk, right? Of course, there is this part of me that wants to say, no, I mean, I know a lot of guys like Charlie Kirk. I think I do. Charlie Kirk, part of what made him successful is that he's able to be relatable in that way. If you don't feel relatable to him, you can relate him to other people you know. You do know people like him. And I don't just mean they're good organizers or debaters. I mean, more importantly, they are Bible-believing conservative Christians. So Bible-believing conservative Christians are a thing in the US, and it's very easy for people in the world of theory to assume they don't really believe the things that they believe. But I'm here to tell you, quite a few of them really do believe the things that they believe. They really do. You should never assume everyone believes what they say they believe, but you should also always assume that they might, and that it's quite possible, because there are people who do. So he's a hero to those people because those people can't tell the difference between sophistry and philosophy. And my real concern with a world in which people celebrate the political assassination of a sophist is a concern about the fact that people can't tell the difference between a sophist and a philosopher. That's why what we're doing is dangerous now. Does everyone follow that? Does that make sense? It does, right? I said it with Luigi Mangione. Like, I was able to, like this dead left part of my soul was able to get some enjoyment from the memes that were circulating around the time of Mangione's assassination of the United Health CEO. Yeah, I could get some enjoyment from that. And I was irritated by the arguments against killing a billionaire like him. But at the same time, I was very cautious and also just like, guys, it's bad. It's just all bad. None of this is good. It's not going to be good for us, whoever we are. Definitely not good for me that this happened. And here's why. People can't tell the difference between the United Health CEO, a billionaire whose profit comes from denying people coverage and screwing them over and resulting in the deaths of millions. They can't tell the difference between a functional bureaucrat doing the bureaucratic evil thing that Hannah Arendt talks about, the banal kind of evil kind of thing. They can't tell the difference between that person and someone like Nina Power, who has, at least for 10 years now, openly said there are two sexes, you can't change your sexes, and there's also something real about sex. There's also some kind of a truth about sex. And yeah, that's the reality. I'm not going to be disrespectful to trans people, but I am also saying this is the reality. People like Nina, I listed off a bunch of other names in that piece, but for right now, I'll just say, a couple of the favorites for anybody kind of in this world would include Mary Harrington and Louise Perry, but more mainstream names like Helen Joyce or Abigail Schreier. Like, these people are smart, courageous women. They're not just grifters. They're not like anti-science weirdos. They're genuine thinkers. They're doing real work, and they're speaking difficult truths, and they get a lot of backlash for it. Backlash that calls them Nazis. Okay? And that's the thing, is people can't tell the difference between a United Health CEO and a woman who's transcritical and a literal Nazi, right? So that's the situation. And you can say, well, I really think that they're wrong and I really disagree with them. And it's like, great. It doesn't make them Nazis, and it doesn't mean that it's okay then to go and shoot them, right? So on Why Left, a couple of times when we talked about Luigi Mangione, I said that is my number one concern, is that all the glorification of Mangione is going to be very powerful for some sick, sad, stupid loser who's sitting around going, wow, I really want to do something good. Nazis are bad. Killing them is good. I want to do something good. I want people to glorify my name. All right, I'll go take care of the evil in the world. And so they go out and they try to take care of the evil in the world. But in a world where people can't think and talk deeply about the nature of the good or of evil, what we're left with is a very dangerous situation for philosophers. Because people can't tell the difference between philosophers and sophists. I do think that Charlie Kirk was a sophist. I just don't think people can tell the difference between philosophers and sophists. Not most people. One of my big goals in life, one of my biggest hopes from the kind of work that we do, is that people will eventually be able to tell the difference. That would be great for people to be able to tell the difference between what Charlie Kirk is doing and what I'm doing. I would love that. But it's not going to work by me just going out there and telling people, oh, he's not really a philosopher, guys. He's not really about open dialogue the way that he acts. It's really just a spectacle. He's really just there to own people. He's really just farming content off of stupid college kids. It doesn't work to try to tell people. There's a lot of people right now trying to tell people about that.
Hate to interrupt, but we would be remiss to not share an advertisement from our sponsors. And we're not sponsored by any corporate or state entities other than ourselves. So I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the past courses and the ongoing courses here at TU. Because if any of them sound exciting to you, well, you can access all of them by becoming a subscriber. That's right, subscribers make all of this possible. Subscribers get access to the course I taught on Martin Heidegger's Being and Time, as well as the course that I taught the first half of last year, Emmanuel Levinas's Totality and Infinity, the second half for which I will be teaching this winter. I've also taught Critical Media Theory and Critical Doxology and Timenergy with my wife, Anne Snellgrove McKerracher, who is the co-host on What's Right. Also, you would get access to the course I taught at the university, 3 semesters worth, on Intro to Critical Social Theory and Socioanalysis. But also, we've had lots of other great professors teach Introduction to Marxism by Chris Catrone, Intro to Lacan via Seminar 11 with Todd McGowan, Introduction to Ivan Illich with Brian Weeks, The Clinical Structures of Psychoanalysis and Autism with Dr. Leon Brenner, the Michael Downs Seminar, Introduction to Slavoj Žižek, Introduction to Nick Land, and Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do, all taught by Michael Downs, as well as What is Sex? That was a collab that I did with Cadell Last. Theory 101, a collab I did with Hello Gorgias. And then also, of course, there's Carl Jaspers' The Idea of the University, PMC Consciousness and Ideology. These were early, very important courses that I taught with friends at TU back in 2023. And they remain important to this day. Every one of these courses comes out of an overarching research project. There's a real driving force, mission, and agenda to the research going on at TU because we want to understand the situation for the sake of large-scale structural change focused on the good life. What does that actually mean? If you really want to go deep, obviously, these courses are something you could spend the better part of a year binging while at work. Ongoing courses that come out on a monthly basis are the Fundamental Problems and Core Concepts at TU with yours truly, also my seminar, Philosophy of Nature with Nina Power, the Benjamin Studebaker seminar, as well as his course, The 12 Political Theorists. We've got some really exciting stuff coming down the line. The only way to make this all possible and really deepen your knowledge and familiarity with all of these different things is to become a subscriber today at http://theoryunderground.com/subscribe. Thank you.
I said I was going to read this quote here. Somebody, if you go to the Discord, you'll look at the hype-anti-churn. I shared a couple of comments that we received on the most recent video, which was neither left nor right. It's a 10-minute video from Keir, the recovering anarchist, someone who's been with us for quite a while. And so her talk was the winner. 3 times as many people voted for her as anyone else. Like, everyone really got a lot out of her talk. And it was very powerful. And she kind of started it by saying she wants to start with Charlie Kirk. And then she said that she, a decade ago, I would have celebrated his death. And she talks about how she was an anarchist. And she's, I wasn't that kind of an anarchist. But, to the outside observer, there's no difference. Anyway, she talks about the importance of not dehumanizing people and of being okay with people being different and believing different things, right? She talks about her growth. And she keeps it short and sweet because all those talks were 5 to 7 minutes long. Well, one of the comments that I did not approve, but that I still felt like sharing with you all, it said, "I'm not sure what useful takeaway is meant to come from such an individualistic testimony." They ended that with a question mark. So I guess I should read it like, "From such an individualistic testimony?" Like, their literal writing style makes them sound whiny. So we're off to a good start. "Why should our focus be on people celebrating his death over the discernible reasons why people would feel that way? I'm glad she feels secure engaging with people with very different worldviews. I guess. I wonder who and or what she's banished back to the margins in order to feel that way." Yeah, because, the basic middle school level critical approach is to say, well, what's being centered? And, so, if you're centering people who either cared about Charlie Kirk or people who are worried about the culture of celebration about his death, well, then you're centering some people. You're necessarily excluding the most marginalized, right? Who's being kicked into the margins by what you're saying? Well, it's trans BIPOC, of course. That's what these people think. And what I didn't say, I almost said it when I shared this screenshot. I almost said, why do they always write like this? Like, they all sound this way. Why is that? But then the other one, it goes like this. This one was approved. This person responded to Keir's comment that said, "Had a blast at the retreat. Thanks for having me." This person responded with, "So horrible that you decided to switch your mind when you were already correct. I understand that you have a lot of compassion and empathy, but don't give literal fascists that kindness, especially when they don't deserve it." Now, Alex and I were talking about this the other day and proposed that this is a very internet brain thing, a very internet brain reaction from people, right? And I said, I know normal people that have this position. And he said, yeah, that's, but the thing is like, they're still downstream from the internet. The internet has, definitely infected them. And I think that that's true. But then I also want to say, I know boomers who don't really go online at all, at all. And they just watch TV. And they're getting some version of this as well. I don't know what it is, but they're getting some version of this. Now, I will just say, as far as mainstream Democrats go, they were not celebrating. Biden, Kamala, the likes of them, they were not celebrating. Nancy Pelosi, they're not celebrating. And I think the reason that even guys like Hassan Piker and Vosh were not celebrating is because everybody realizes that's a dangerous thing to do. When everybody's saying, well, you know, he's pro-gun, so he kind of had it coming. If you say, ha, Charlie, he got what he got. Good. You know, well, you're basically signaling to the people who don't like you in the audience, they can do that to you as well. And so, of course, everybody's saying the political climate needs to be toned down right now. I'm just saying the stakes of real thinking and real discourse could not be higher. The stakes could not be higher, and that people might literally be worried if you're doing philosophy as opposed to sophistry. People have no problem with you building a train set down in your basement as long as you have the money for it and you don't have to take out a second loan. They also have no problem with you independently studying any of the tried and true paths laid out by the institutions. If you were studying biology on your own, they'd just be like, that's cool. You really like biology. Instead, you're studying something that means that you should question everything. But it's a very dangerous time to be questioning everything. And I think that's one of the bigger questions driving the sort of superficial question that we otherwise respond to in a superficial way. What are you doing? What are we doing? Well, we're living in the question. And I know that's a dangerous thing to do, but we are doing that. And now to actually close this out, I'll just say, so what is meaningful activity? What is the actual self-justifying activity that you can do? If you write a piece that makes everyone else go, wow, you wrote that piece and it got published in something that's very impressive, then it's not just you spend a lot of time on the internet, you spend a lot of time in books, you spend a lot of time listening to audiobooks and podcasts. It's instead like, oh, you did something. People like to see that you did something. Well, people kind of want to see you do homework is what they're really getting at. But there's a reason that so many people who've gotten into Theory Underground don't do Theory Underground for the homework. That's that instrumentalized approach. That's somebody else telling you how to spend your limited free time. And even if you love them and respect them and are excited by what they're doing, it still feels weird because this is an activity you're doing in what relative leisure time you actually do have. It's not something that you're doing where you're like trying to like pull your own fingernails out, pull your own teeth out, because you're trying to live up to somebody's expectations. A lot of you already have homework because you're already in school, or you dropped out of school because you can't do homework. You just can't make yourself do it. You would rather die. And currently working a dead-end job is better than dying. And listening to this stuff in your own way, on your own terms, makes you feel better, makes you feel alive somehow, like you're still doing it somehow. And I think that you are. Not only do I think that you are, but I think that it matters. I think it actually matters. I think that there are genuine questions, genuine problems, genuine concepts that need working through and that need developing. And that nobody else is going to do it because they can't, because they've been captured. So I just wanted to kind of give myself this pep talk and to give it to you all as well. Matthew Stanley's talk was about rewilding the professions or the professionals. I'm going to say, I don't know if they can be rewilded, but for me and for my people, for us, we're already wild. All right? We're already wild. There's this big question of like, how can those of us who are already wild work with the people who aren't, but who are trying to do something important? Right? How can those of you who are really, really good at living within institutions and satisfying its incentives, how can you work with people who can't? There's a great question there, But I already know I already am not bound by its strictures, bound by their strictures. I already feel free of that. I felt free of that even when I was at the university, because I said, this too shall pass. I won't have to do this for the rest of my life. I won't keep doing this. I will not. I would rather die, right? But I grit my teeth and worked through it because I ultimately was like, this is what matters right now, right? By the time that I was disillusioned with the university, it was already too late. I had already taken on too much debt and I needed to at least finish. At least that's how I felt. But if you've dropped out because you're like, no, I don't need to finish, I'm here to tell you that's right. Not only do you not need to finish, but also no one's going to use those degrees for the things that they end up doing anyway, right? So all this like, oh, but you have to learn how to think. They're trying to say you have to learn how to think the way they do. Or they're saying you don't really think because you haven't learned to think the way they had to learn. And I'm here to say that's bullshit. It's dogmatic, ideological bullshit. They are assuming a lot. All this time, I've had one assumption, and that there is something genuine. That there is a genuine kind of thinking, writing, and speaking. I've assumed that. I've assumed that there's a there. They are assuming that they already know what it is, how it works, what it looks like, and that more or less it's been monopolized by the institutions that gave them lots of stickers. Bullshit. So yeah, thanks everybody. I had to get that off my chest. That's what I wanted to talk about because I don't know what homework in the future of TU is going to look like. But don't worry, it's not going to be like that. And if you do really want that, then you just need to reach out to me personally and we'll work up something for you, right? I do office hours, by appointment, we can figure something out. If you really want something like homework, we can do it. But my block with developing homework for people was basically a block that was like, well, I wouldn't want to do this. And I feel weird giving it to people. And then people get all guilty about it. And I hate that. I don't want to do it. It just feels wrong. What are we here for? What are we actually going to do? It's not get some stickers, right? We're going to do something else. I'm really excited to tell you what I'm here for and what I'm going to do and what I'm working on, but I'll save that for a different one. Got a little time if anybody wants to talk. I'm going to switch the perspective here so that everybody's visible. I hope I hit on everything, and I hope I actually tied up the threads enough. I know that probably felt a little meandering, especially for people who are less accustomed to following my weave, but yeah, I kind of feel like I said everything. And so I'm really curious to hear from people who do feel very schooled by the institutional criteria, incentive structures, etc., or for people who really that doesn't work for you. Either way, I'm very interested to hear what you might think about that.
Well, I can say that I'm glad that you tied in the topic of people asking why we do this, because this was on my mind. This has been on my mind for several months now, that this is kind of stultifying my development and the way I structure my free time, like spending, I don't know, 10, 20 hours in the library each week. After some time, it feels like I myself sit and think, like when somebody asks me, why are you researching like psychoanalysis, ontology, like things like that? And it's not such a big problem now after all of these years at TU, and like, but I think this can be a huge roadblock for us, right? And I love the example of the like dad developing at little train station in the basement, because it is really true that if somebody gives you like if you consume it, then it's basically like, okay, yeah, it's fine. But if you sit and do something which is insane in a way, then
It's insane because it doesn't make sense to them. You know, it just goes
Exactly.
against.
Yeah. It's nonsensical. Maybe that's a better word. Yeah. Like in the immediate sense, you can't, because this is like this has a lot to do with like development and like what you've been saying, that we don't know yet, and like guys, like people at the university, it's ridiculous because they assume that they know how you should think and what's the right way to think, and like just sitting and saying like I'm reading, I'm writing, I don't know what it's about, like how should I know?
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, so here we go.
And that's the other thing I wanted to just on that. There's no telling what you can do with it once you've processed it, but the processing of it takes years too. And so it's like, yeah, you'll do great things.
I can really relate to that feeling. I've spent several months sending texts to different literary contests and waiting for a response so I can tell my parents that, hey, I finally made money with this thing that I'm so passionate about and that I spend hours and hours for for years now doing. Yeah, so I think this was great timing for me also because I just got here, and I also am wondering, while I read all the stuff for the courses, uh, why I'm doing this. I mean, I'm passionate about thinking in and of itself, but there's also the point that you bring up about trying to make the world a better place, right? That's part of what I found attractive about your perspective, Dave, is exactly the idea of the calling, right? Like if we're not trying to make the world better just in like terms of material terms, right? Like people have potential, they have things that really make them love living, right? And I know what I love doing. I love writing, and philosophy feeds into that. So this is part of that process for me personally, but we together can also, think about how we can help other people get to that place. And yeah, no, I'm just grateful to be here.
Thanks, Kevin. My dog just chewed up one of my pens, by the way. I just discovered. She's over here just chewing up a pen. Daisy, you don't do that. You don't do that. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, feeling that pressure though. It's like I'm at this point now where I feel like I have enough objective things that I can show people that make it so that this all pays off, like I'm successful, you know? It's like I can do this full time, but it still doesn't work. And so I hope that you all realize also that if you decided to try to make a living doing philosophy or teaching online or something, even at the point that it's objectively true, it's working, it's still not going to satisfy them. And part of it is just like it's not as impressive to the naked eye as some great athletic accomplishment or a really epic train set. Because like, that's at least something they can see. And it's like, yeah, it's like they should know that this is something more than a train set. But also, like, what's wrong with a train set? You know, I don't want to be bashing on that. But I do think one thing everyone could use going forward is just to tell them, well, it's either this or I get into Warhammer 40K. And that's very expensive. Just show them. Just go and buy one miniature and bring it home and just kind of like, assemble it and paint it. And then when they ask what you're doing, you say, I'm constructing a threat. Yeah. Ruiz.
Yeah, I guess for me, I think a lot about, um, I mean, not too much anymore, but I mean, I guess it's a big struggle to like, all right, if I'm doing, I think the question that people ask, what are you doing with that? Is kind of like, are you going to make money from that? Like, is this that's kind of like what I always relate to. What are you doing with this? And I remember early on, I kind of got into I guess this whole process of thinking and trying to figure things out from George Carlin. And I remember him saying something along the lines of like, I'm not trying to get people to think. I'm trying to show people that I'm thinking.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, I kind of like that approach. I kind of like that. And I remember the first time that I started kind of getting into this stuff that people would be like, why are you doing that? And I remember my initial reaction would kind of be like, why aren't we all kind of doing it? It almost feels to me like the house is on fire and I'm trying to figure out a way out in a sense. And I know this is a very simplistic example, but this is kind of like the gut feeling I had at the time was like the house is on fire. I'm trying to figure out how to get out of here, or at least, figure out how we can stop this fire or something along those lines. And people are like, no, wait, like, why are you doing this? It's like, dude, the house is on fire. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean, why am I doing this right now? This is like a big problem. But
Right.
but it's interesting how I settled more into like the idea of like you could just flip that question on anybody really. And it's like I think it's funny that it just is a question that comes up like you said, because I do have other hobbies and no one ever really questions that. I mean, occasionally they will. Like my wife bakes and occasionally she'll bake something really good and then it's like, oh, why don't you do this for money? And it's like we do something else for money already. Like we're not looking for like side hustles and stuff, but it seems to come up a lot. But I mean, it's always like I always think, and it is a little bit confrontational, I guess, at that point, because if I say, "Oh, I'm studying philosophy," they're like, "Oh, what are you doing that for?" And it's like, dude, why do you work at Target like every single day of your life? Like, what's your problem, dude? Like, I'm just thinking about stuff. Like, what are you doing? So it's almost, oh, but it almost seems like it goes back to what I started it with. Oh, I have to make money, which is true. I'm not arguing that. But there's something, I guess what I'm getting at is like the relationship that we all kind of have with practicality and are
Mm.
what we do is what we're doing practical is I guess the question that, and I don't know if that comes from, at least for me, I think that comes from like, the obvious thing of, we gotta make money, we gotta do stuff. And I guess the trajectory of our entire life, like we get blasted off into our lives as like everything that you're doing has to be aimed at making money. So
Mm.
I think I've gotten a little bit better at just, all right, I'm doing this because it just feels like the right thing to do. And I like what's going on.
Nice.
I don't have my hand raised, but I just can't stop thinking about like a particular method of going about like either rewilding or self-justifying. And like it's almost dangerous to do it in this way, but it's I don't know. I would if I had to make a claim, it's the most risky, but it's high risk, high reward. It's just with humor. And it's like, it's if I were to bring in my normie pH pool test analogy where you have the x-axis acidic and soft and the y-axis based and cringe, you're circling this center and you're moving around all sorts of places. And with humor, you're sort of touching on acidic, you're poking at people, but you also can get very based and very cringe, very abstract. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And it's like, I don't know. It's method where you can dance and poke and also be like, but have you thought about this? And it's like, I don't know. I'm circling this sort of method and I don't know. Humor is just something special, something special. And it's extremely risky because, you're literally in the act of circling like I don't know the question or a question or danger, and it's like I don't know. I'm sure it's related to something in the material world, like physics, where you're circling something, and as soon as you touch it, it just explodes and sparks into this whole thing, and now you don't know where it's gonna go, and now you're dead because you mess with science and shit. But there's something to it. There's something to it. I swear, guys. That's
So,
what I'm thinking about.
yeah, so like there might be some delicate way of making a joke out of it, or kind of like turning the joke back on them somehow.
Yeah, you poke at, they ask, what are you doing? It's like, well, I don't really know. I kind of like thinking, and but I don't really know how to do it. I'm trying to figure it out. It's like, what are you talking about? You don't know how to think? Well, have you thought about thinking? And they're just confused. Like they don't know. They don't know. But then it gets them to think. Maybe sometimes it's circling that spark. I don't know. It's just questioning.
Why are you doing this? Yeah, I've been asking myself that a lot. I'm also like wondering what doing is in the first place. But then I have to start thinking like, what is though? Do you know what is? Do you know what is? Because you're asking me the question like you know. What is? Do you know about, then like they talk for, they say whatever. You'd be like, well, because the funny thing about that is like literally that's what ontology and metaphysics are supposed to help us try to figure out. But for some weird reason, that wasn't in my high school experience, but it was in every person who's ever ruled the world's high school experience. So what's going on there? Like, why does everyone who's ever had political power have some introduction to thinking philosophically and take a class in logic in their high school, but then I didn't get to? Did you? You could turn it back on. I mean, now this is no longer funny, but it's like I do like to kind of ask people. Yeah. So when did you? So you don't like philosophy. So when did you actually study it? Like when did you actually get to study it? All right, Wukas.
It's so funny what Rui said. Like, why you work at Target? I have a story related to this. Like directly, I was getting ready to work, standing in front of the building where I live, and the lady comes. She's like this 50 years old lady. She has her own restaurant. He doesn't give a fuck. She comes around and asks me, why are you doing this? Like, because I'm a bike courier, so I'm sitting with all of this equipment, and why you do this? And I'm like, it pays. And she goes like, but what do you study? And I go, philosophy. And she's, what did you learn there? And I say, to think. It's so hard not to sound like a fucking snob, because like I go to think, and and she goes like, it takes 3 years of primary school to think, and and I went like, maybe for you, because I was like, yeah, I'm fucking stupid, man. Like,
yeah. That's either a way of calling yourself stupid or of calling her stupid, right? Could.
Yeah, but it's difficult to like. It's not difficult, but when you first get asked and you say like, I think and stuff, and it's like, no, I just pretend like I don't understand anything. Like maybe you do. I don't. Yeah.
I don't know, the non-dupe heirs. So, she is smarter in a way, probably. This was one of the things we talked about at the retreat. I told the story about the math professor who made fun of me for a whole semester because I frowned so intensely. And the semester was almost over. She like stops the entire class and like does this whole like meta lecture. She's supposed to be teaching algebra, and instead she's over here like going like, when you're thinking, you're sad. When you're not thinking, you're happy. She literally did this. And I was like, this is after a whole semester of her like always asking me why I was frowning so much and proposing that I was overthinking. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to like follow what you're saying about these formulas that I'm supposed to be memorizing so that I can get out of your freaking class. Because it takes a lot of concentration for me to follow something that's not immediately interesting. And she definitely did not have the ability to make anything she was doing immediately interesting. And going back to the whole institutionalization thing, it's like, if you have the libidinal economy of the kind of person for whom the incentive structures of institutions like actually work, it doesn't have, it is already seemingly inherently interesting, right? Like it is, the professor doesn't have to show you why it's interesting, because you're already interested in getting an A. You're already interested in applying yourself to your homework. You're already interested in being a good student. Like there's all these things there that feel intrinsic, even though they are extrinsic, of course. And yeah, it's just like this it's like, no, like I'm like intensely frowning because I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not like thinking about like, I don't like, it seems so weird to me to try to smile in math class. Like I like sit there and soften my face. It's like, no, I'm trying to follow what you're saying. And it's like, I'm literally just trying to memorize shit that is not actually interesting. The fact is math is fascinating. It's very interesting. And a good professor can actually show you why, right? And some people, when they were younger, they were exposed to it by somebody who was capable of showing the inherently fascinating aspects of mathematics, which is great. Great for those people. Anyway, she didn't like me, or at least like to give me grief, because she was the advisor of Campus Alive in Christ. And Campus Alive in Christ thought that I was like a really bad person because I was the president of the philosophy club. And so, you know, this was all like literally her picking on me, because every meeting she went to for Campus Alive in Christ were these people sitting around complaining about the philosophy club. Because there were a couple of people who would come and try to like do a Christian apologetics. And I've got nothing against Christianity. Never, well, at the time I had a lot against it. But what I do I still dislike is this sort of dogmatic ideological sophistry that tries to get in the way of people having genuine discourse. It's like, okay, well, go sit at the little kids table and leave us the fuck alone. Like, how about that? Did you ever think about that? Just go away. Leave us alone. Why don't you just stop pretending to think, stop pretending to be like one of the big kids, and just go be happy without thinking. Just go. Just skitter scatter. Get out don't let the door hit you on the way out. But it's kind of fascinating because it's like, as a math teacher with the institutional powers that were vested in her, she does this meta lecture about how, well, if you're thinking too much, you're not going to be happy. I'm springboarding on this just to wrap up my point by saying I also think that people think that we're sad. And I'm not sad. My life is better than theirs. I'm sorry. Like, I have one of the best lives of anyone I know. I'm generally pretty excited about the things that I'm doing. I care about the things that I'm doing. I care about the people in my life. I have a good life. But people think I'm sad because I'm not smiling and bantering with like their quirky banter that they learned from cheap television, you know? And in America, if you're not smiling, that must mean you're sad. Whereas like in Asia or most other countries, that's not normal. It's not normal to run around smiling, you know, or walk around smiling. You know, it's a very strange thing. All right. Anyway, Lukas.
It's the same point as before. Like, if a guy runs a marathon and he's like sweating and shitting his pants and, you know, looking all tired, and nobody goes like, "Why don't you smile, Ben?" like, but like thinking is not pleasurable in like, at least for me, right? So when you finish, it's great. I've had one great professor during my studies, and we had a seminar, and he was explaining something, Plato or something, and he looked at us after speaking for 20 minutes, and he went like, "I know none of you are thinking, because none of you look like the guy on the left behind you, Dave, because everybody was looking like either smiling or doing this like fake fucking Greek philosopher thing, like sitting with, yeah. But he went like, you would look exactly like that. Yeah, if you begin to understand, and if you were like one grain of sand of understanding was in your head, then you would be looking like the guy on the left. And he was great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know none of you are really thinking. That's awesome.
The rest of this conversation was really awesome, but if you want to access it, then you just have to become a member at TU, where you'll get access to all of my past seminars. The David McKerracher seminar has a ton of lectures similar to this that will help you get your bearing in the world of philosophy and theory, specifically for people doing it in the underground. Whether you're in school now, or might be, or have dropped out, if you feel like this could be beneficial for you, then go ahead and subscribe at theoryunderground.com/subscribe. And I'll look forward to seeing you at one of these Zoom calls maybe. All right, take care, everybody.